I wonder what line Gordon picked.
Oh my
This is
gosh.
actually what I've been looking forward to. This is like, yeah.
This is it?
Yeah.
All right. Go shorty, it's your birthday. We gonna party like it's your birthday. We gonna sip Bacardi like it's your birthday. And we don't give a fuck, it's not your birthday. This week we're talking about 50 Cent's debut studio album, Get Rich or Die Tryin.
Welcome to the Essential Albums podcast, where three guys from 85 have a conversation about some of the biggest albums ever and forgotten favorites from yesteryear. We'll dive into an album's place in culture, discuss its merits, and decide if a record holds up and is worth your time. Of course, we get into a lot more than just that. So join longtime friends Ryan, Gordon, and Anise as we dive into this. This is a new favorite for me. I don't know. What about you guys?
I feel like it hits all three. I was actually just thinking that. I'm like, kind of old favorite because there's a lot of songs on here that are just sort of listened to ever since.
This is true.
Forgotten favorite because there's some songs on here I was like, oh shit, I forgot about this song. And it's one of the biggest albums ever because it literally was.
Yeah.
It's funny to hear Ryan call it a new favorite when it just turned 18 a week ago.
Man, so this is quite a different episode for our listeners out there. So this one, I went in, this is not an album I've ever heard before. Like before getting ready for this podcast, it was kind of like a fresh ears dive into this. So I've got my notes here, but what I think about the whole thing, and it was quite the experience actually. My thoughts on 50 Cent have changed a lot. So yeah, I guess I'm excited to talk about this guy.
That's interesting. So they've changed in the last week or over some time?
They changed over listening to the album.
Okay.
Really just the first time going through it, he's a really good singer. That was one of the standout things about this. It was getting to the point where there were some songs where I was like, okay, these verses are good. I know he's a great singer, so I know if he sings the hook is going to be really good. And then bam, he gave me a great hook that he sings. Yeah. So it's yeah.
There's so many great hooks on here. It's pretty much there's some songs In the Club, perfect example. It's pretty much just a straight up pop song.
Mm.
Pretty much singing the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of rapping in this song, but
obviously. But I just mean the hooks. Usually when a hip hop artist like this, you would hear a feature come in and sing the hook.
Right.
Where for him, it's pretty much him. And the only time someone comes in is one of those people who would normally be the guy who comes in and sings a hook, Nate Dogg, when he pops up at the end.
And you know what? On that track, I was like, oh, damn, who's this guy singing? He sounds kind of nasally. I wanted to hear 50 Cent's low voice. I was disappointed. Oh, okay, I guess you could get this guy on here, whatever.
I think I read that he actually did sing the hook on it. And then when Nate Dogg came in, because Nate Dogg's a legend, and he's a legend for singing hooks. So
yeah. He had
awesome.
to do it.
I'm just enjoying Ryan's reaction to everything. He's like, oh yeah, who's this? Who's Nate Dogg? This guy's pretty cool. It's have you heard next episode?
Well, it was he has a good voice, but that's a really intimate song. So I felt if finally after a while, there's a lot of hard tracks, and then finally we had a sexy track, and it would have been even more intimate if 50 Cent was singing. Even if the other guy is technically a better singer, which not sure that he is.
It's not better. I just mean it's a sort of when you can get Nate Dogg on your album, you sort of have.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. But artistically, I mean, market wise, sure, but artistically, maybe not.
Yeah, I understand because that is a song where you kind of it was something rare for 21 Questions is the song we're talking about, but it's sort of rare for a gangster rapper to kind of get into his feelings like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Something that became a lot more common now with artists like Drake and Kanye West and Tyler the Creator. That song sounds like it could have been one of those artists doing it now. Just even
that's true, yeah.
The questions and yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of people just to add on to what you're saying there, Anise. I know a lot of people cite was it Song Cry by Jay-Z as being kind of opening that up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What came first?
Song Cry. Because I think that came out in 99 or whenever the Blueprint came out. I think it was 2001.
Right. I forget the date.
So I guess.
But after serious track, hard track, and then suddenly you have this really intimate. There's quite a bit of contrast there. I don't think there's any gun samples in that song. Finally.
So I guess this is like a good way to kind of kick it off. Like, what's your relationship with 50 Cent then, Ryan? Like over the years, like what did you know about 50 Cent going into this week? Were you hesitant about doing this? Were you scared to do this one? Like, how did you feel?
I was terrified. No, I love this. I love jumping in fresh. So okay, interesting. So what do you think? Like the first time you hear about a rapper and his name is 50 Cent, you gotta wonder like why. So like I'm thinking, okay, it's not like a really hard name. I'm not really sure what it means. So okay, whatever. I didn't get it. But then like hearing his verses and stuff, he's not the most articulate in terms of like hearing all of the consonants in his rapping. So you lose a lot of the words. So I kind of like was turned off a little bit quickly in that sense. And this was also coming out in high school when I was not listening to rap music at all. So that was my association. And then the other thing, well, sorry, was that Denise?
With end of high school, right? Sort of 2003.
Yeah, I think,
yeah,
we would have graduated that year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I remember hearing this and obviously the tracks, the singles, and actually I liked a lot of the singles, but not all of them. In the Club I loved, but yeah, so I didn't think of him as a great singer until after hearing the album straight through. That's one thing for sure. And other than that, I mean, I just thought he was like one of the veterans because I know this was huge, right? So like, I just thought he was one of the veterans of rap music. That's just my view of him. I don't know. What about you guys?
Well, for me, this was, we kind of talked about it a bit in the Biggie episode, how we kind of didn't get into Biggie until sort of this era, like the early 2000s. Where in this, for me, 50 Cent was one of the first like rappers where I sort of not bought the album, but just became a fan of everything. Because I guess at that point I was driving as well, so I was playing the CD in the car a lot.
Yeah,
and I was meeting a lot of different friends because I was in college, and they were listening to more hip hop than you guys in high school. and then also we started going to the club. We turned 19 shortly after all this stuff came out, like the year after 50 Cent came out, we all started turning 19, so we were able to go to clubs. And when you're at the club, you couldn't escape any of the 50 Cent, G Unit, Lloyd Banks, Young Buck, The Game, like all those G Unit guys. It seemed like there was always a song out, always a brand new song out. So
sure.
I was deep in it. I had a G Unit shirt. I bought a spinner necklace. It was more of a joke, but I still bought a spinner necklace. I don't know. I kind of like the whole group thing because I had liked Wu-Tang before that, and then this day came out. They were a group and they were all working together, so I was into that as well. But yeah, it was just part of getting into hip hop, going to the clubs, and listening to music while driving, which was new.
Yeah, for me, I kind of had like a weird path to 50 Cent, mostly because like in 99, 2000, 2001-ish, that was like a lot of, for me, it was a lot of like 2001 by Dr. Dre was a really big album. Eminem's first two albums, you also had D12. So this seemed like not the natural path, but this path of like Shady Aftermath kind of continued on. But I was more or less around 2002, I was starting to get more into rock music. Like I was fully embracing like Radiohead and Bjork and like Strokes and White Stripes and stuff like that. So I was kind of moving away from hip hop. So I never bought this album, but it was everywhere, right? So I saw it on music videos, and The Club was like probably the biggest song of that year. And then of course hanging out with you and East, driving around the car, like you were buying like, you got more into the G Unit stuff and you went further down that. So I was always kind of hearing that, even though I never purchased these albums or was like listening to them from beginning to end. I was definitely exposed to it.
Because even for me at the beginning, when this album, Get Rich or Die Tryin came out, I didn't buy it like right away. I wasn't part of that initial boom. For me, it was more so like the burning era. So I'd burn a CD in the club, and the next CD would have 21 Questions or Many Men, and then Heat. And I sort of almost all my albums at that point were having a 50 Cent song on it, because there seemed like every week I was discovering a new one, but they're all just off this album. And eventually I was just like, fuck it, let me just buy the CD so I can have it.
Yeah.
I think I bought it used, even just like Live On or whatever. I don't even think I bought it new.
Do you remember?
Go ahead. Well, I was just noting how different, so I just got it. I just started to listen to this, but you kind of, Gordon, were moving away from rap. I got into rap a little bit later, and Anise kind of got heavier into it in the middle. Is that kind of
Yeah.
describe what's happening?
I would say I was
Yeah.
sort of like in the Gordon train, like when 2001 came out, sort of that late 90s, like Ice Cube dropped an album, I think 98 or something. I was kind of getting into all that stuff because they were sort of mixed in with like the new metal in a way, because like Ice Cube was touring with Limp Bizkit, or
Rock Superstar.
Method Man was featured on songs, and so there was a huge just mixing of hip hop and rocks, and kind of became a mush. And this was sort of, that's where my interest in it all kind of started bubbling, I guess.
Would you say new metal bridged you over to this? Fred
Maybe.
Durst?
Well, it was
Anyway,
definitely part of it.
joke.
It wasn't like I didn't listen to hip hop before, but that definitely sort of started mashing up worlds. It's where it kind of
Yeah.
became, oh, okay, I can be a rock kid and I can own a Korn CD and a Ice Cube CD. That's cool.
Yeah, that was like Rage for me, right? That was the bridge for me, but it was almost like Rage was an island of rap. It was like the only kind of rapping I was listening to for a while, It's weird. It didn't bridge out to, I guess, because they came early on the new metal scene or whatever, if you consider it new metal.
Yeah, but this was like definitely the first era where I was buying a lot of rap CDs, and I was anticipating, like, it wasn't just sort of whatever kind of came into my interest. It was sort of, I like 50 Cent. Oh, Lloyd Banks, he's G-Unit. I'm waiting for his album. Oh, Young Buck, oh, he's my favorite. I'm waiting for that album. Then The Game, and then T.I. had his album King that came out in there that I was a really big fan of, and Kanye West came out the following year, and I was just sort of more aware of what was going on in rap more than I had ever been before that.
Yeah, my hip hop listening was kind of like in 98, 99, I was like DMX, Jay-Z, big fan of Mace and stuff like that around that time. And then new metal hit. And then once I kind of started hanging out with you guys more and seeing the rock that you guys were listening to, it was more like, okay, I can't listen to this new metal stuff anymore. So that started to kind of fade away. And you guys weren't like, nobody's really into D12, like, unless you're a hip hop fan, you respected it or you liked Eminem or whatever. But like, you guys were more the rock vein. So that's why I fully started embracing the rock kind of stuff around this time. And I was leaving the mainstream hip hop at the time. Not that I was pursuing underground stuff or anything. It's just, that's the direction I was going with my music.
Definitely rock was the bigger, for me, it would be, like I was saying, it would be more, I would be buying all the rock CDs or downloading all the rock CDs, but then burning a mix of rap. It wouldn't be just,
yeah.
It would be 50 Cent with, Timbaland and T.I. and a bunch of different artists all mixed into one. It was just more of the singles, I guess, I was aware of. But yeah. And then it wasn't until like this G-Unit era where I started buying CDs more regularly. So
you said you bought this album a little bit later on, Anise. Do you recall like what your first experience was like listening to it from beginning to end?
It was probably in our buddy Chris in his car, because I'm pretty sure he had it instantly, and we're either in my car or his car. We were all working together at Walmart at the time. So yeah, it seemed like every night it was just, we're either in one of our cars driving. So it was either my music or his music, and his music was not rock music. It was 50 Cent.
Yeah, for me, I would say when I finally listened to this album from beginning to end, I was like, I always thought like 50 Cent, he was definitely a presence. Like, he was very mainstream. He's one of the top hip hop selling artists of all time. But I was kind of like skeptical of, like, I knew the whole era and I knew kind of like what he represented in my mind at the time. But then when I listened to the album, I think I probably listened to it around from beginning to end for the first time, probably around 2010, I want to say, about 10 years ago. And it kind of changed my whole perspective on it. Like, it seemed like, okay, it's not just about like shooting or violence and stuff like that. There's more to it than that. Like, he's good at balancing.
Gordon, there's like gun samples in every freaking song. What are you talking about?
But there's more to it in the sense that like he's got his sexy rhymes. Like, he's able to balance it. Like, there's gunshots in every song on Ready to Die, it seems like, but like he's got a balance to it, and it's not all that. There's more to it there. So going through the album gives you the opportunity to hear everything, and it opens everything up.
The hooks still keep the album fairly poppy. So even if you're not a fan of rapping or rap music, you can sort of, you still have the choruses there you can sing along to that are very catchy.
I would say that is actually like the big strength of 50 Cent. After listening to this album straight through, it seems like, the hooks combined with his singing voice, that's the part that I was more interested in. Like usually on a rap album, I'm more interested in the verses, and I'm like, okay, if the choruses suck or whatever, I'm like, okay, I can let that go. But with this album, it kind of flipped on me, and I was looking forward to the choruses more than the verses. I mean, the verses are good. There are some better ones, and I felt like they kind of got better as the album went along, and then like kind of tapered off at the end. But the hooks were consistent the whole time. Like every song has got some cool hook in it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's really where the strength lies. Because usually you don't expect a rapper to be that good of a singer. Maybe that's just Kanye West's fault or something. But I don't know, like you usually hear auto-tune or something to glaze over it, but it didn't sound like that on this album.
This is sort of before the auto-tune era.
Yeah, but I felt like, but before then, rappers would sing occasionally, but it was like not that good, and it was like it just understood. It was just understood, like, okay, they're just singing shitty, and that's the style, whatever. But it sounds good.
At this point, 50 Cent was being brought into other people's songs even to do hooks, because a lot of those, like again, the G Unit guys who throwing on hooks for them. I think he did hooks for even Eminem, so it's something he's just started doing.
Was he known as the hook guy?
Yes, I believe so. But I should also throw in there one of my earliest memories of 50 Cent pre this album, other than the story of him getting shot 9 times, which was very much part of the marketing, but also the song being passed around on the internet of How to Rob. But right. I didn't really know. It was one of those, this is a song How to Rob, and it wasn't until years later was like, oh, this is the same guy saying this song. But right. Yeah, we just sort of, at the time it was to me an unknown rapper just kind of going in on a bunch of celebrities and rappers talking about how he's going to rob them.
Yeah, definitely put him on the map. Like doing the research, or like I think around the time I listened to the this album for the very first time, like 10 years ago or whatever, I went to Wikipedia and I read like the backstory behind it, because I'm like, I remember obviously like him getting shot 9 times is like one of the biggest facts like that's cited with 50 Cent. But so yeah, when you read the backstory on it and how this album came to be, how he became popular, it's just like crazy. It's like for the longest time it was one of the most interesting Wikipedia reads I could find. But yeah, so he had that song to create publicity, and he pretty much like this is everybody from Jay-Z to Wu-Tang to Mariah Carey. Like he's got everybody. And then so when this album, leading up to this album getting released, basically he had another track where he was listing names from people in his neighborhood that he knew growing up, other drug dealers and stuff like that. And these drug dealers were like, no, that you can't do that. You're like a snitch. We want you blacklisted. So all the record labels essentially blacklisted him. And it wasn't and then because of that song, that's what led to him getting shot. He was like attacked and somebody shot him 9 times and he survived that.
That's crazy. Okay. So he called out drug dealers in his songs. And one track.
Song, one song specifically was called Ghetto Quran. And it got leaked. But basically the guy that he cites in that movie or in that song was like put a hit out on him, like you can't be like talking that. And that guy was affiliated with like Murder Inc. and like Ja Rule and stuff like that. So that's what that's where the roots of that beef comes from. So that's pretty much. And then there's an early theory that's why Jam Master Jay got shot, because he took 50 Cent under his wing and was like trying to like teach him the ways of like hip hop and introduce him to contacts in the music industry. But that's since been debunked. But yeah, so it's like this whole crazy story. Then Eminem ended up hearing a demo tape or something, and that's how Eminem signed him, and he joined Shady Aftermath, and that's how this album came out. This
was definitely the first time I remember like an artist having an origin story. Like before I even heard a song by him, I already knew all like certain things about him, and he already had the street cred before I even heard like a single line. Well, I guess I had heard How to Rob, but I didn't realize it was him. But I hadn't heard like a single song.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this guy's been shot 9 times. He made fun of a bunch of drug dealers, and it was just this whole aura around him.
Yeah, he's like a legend.
Yeah,
That's
and
a
then
pretty cool story, man.
And then he gets signed by Eminem and Dre, so all of a sudden he has instant credibility.
Yeah, he signs like a $1 million record deal, and they're in the music video for In the Club, like showing how they're making him, building him.
Yeah.
Got to mail out the deal, and I'm still in my prime.
Exactly.
How does he feel about this whole being shot 9 times? Does he regret like calling out the drug dealers, or
no?
Is he like, yeah, I did it?
so what I've read about it was basically he said he was appreciated. Murder Inc. and Ja Rule, they call him a snitch. And so they had a different attitude. You got to think too, like I looked up where these guys live, like where they grew up. So you have Jam Master Jay and Ja Rule. They were born in like the neighborhood of Hollis, Queens, which is just kind of like a subdivision of Queens. And then 50 Cent was born in Jamaica, Queens, which is just a few miles away. Like it's like walking distance, right? So these guys probably knew each other, and they know who's like these drug dealers, the Supreme Team, things like that. They know this is who they're growing up with. So their beef could have been way longer, or the second you start like, you're like, I'm on this side, like it gets divided pretty quick, right?
Because you got to think of why he decided to do that in the first place. He must have had some beef, right? So,
or he just did it not thinking like what would happen, like not knowing
maybe
the repercussions.
Maybe.
But
I guess so. But when you use somebody's name that you know in a song, you think twice for a second. You're like, That's so true. He was just like, no, fuck it.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, he got shot 9 times, and then he went to the hospital. I think he was in the hospital for, I think I read 13 days. And then he went home, or he was recovering at his girlfriend's house, and he had to use a walker for 6 weeks. And then for about 5 months, he started working out, and that's when he was fully healed after 5 months from this. Crazy. And then the guy who shot him apparently was like, Mike Tyson's one of his best friends or something like that. But 3 weeks later, after 50 Cent got shot, he was found dead. So it's like it's got crazy connections.
Shit.
And yeah, so it's a pretty crazy origin story.
So no arrests were made.
Is this all covered in the movie Get Rich or Die Tryin?
Loosely. A funny thing about that movie though, I watched it this week just to see it, because I haven't seen it since the theater, and I was like, I gotta check this out. And it's better. It's not 16% bad like Rotten Tomatoes says, but it's pretty good.
I've never seen it.
You've never seen it? It loosely covers, I guess, his life. Like it's like 8 Mile, but I don't know how much of it's real. Like towards the end, it's goes kind of crazy, but yeah, check it out.
I'll wait for the documentary. I'm sure there'll be like a 10-part documentary in like 10 years.
That's funny. So yeah, that's kind of like the backstory to this album, like from 2000 to 2003 when this album came out. So I guess we can get into some song questions. Let me just pull up.
Do it.
So there's, I think, 5 singles from this album. They were In the Club, 21 Questions, Many Men, PIMP, and If I Can't. So the funny thing is, just to kind of click off this songs about the singles, I read just before we started this that there was debate between Eminem, who was like the executive producer of this album, and Jimmy Iovine, who like runs Interscope, on what the first single from this album should be. And Jimmy Iovine wanted If I Can't, and Eminem said he wanted In the Club. And so they both asked 50 Cent, and 50 Cent quietly said he wanted In the Club to be it. So that's how that became the first single from this album.
Come on, that's kind of obvious.
Yeah.
Is it though?
That's like iconic now.
It is now, yeah. Now with history and all that stuff, it's like, wow, like how was this like a difficult question? But there's
actually a bunch of songs on here that I guess could have popped, but In the Club, I think just had the right, like I said, it was more almost like a pop song. So that the fact that he's singing, like every line is perfectly clear for people to sing along with. Like I remember knowing the lyrics to In the Club, not only the album explicit version, I knew the edited version that they played on the radio because it was slightly different. And depending on, because the club, one of the clubs we went to in town was a radio live to air, so they'd be playing that version in the club. But but yeah, it. I don't know. It seems. I know it's hard to judge now because it has so much history. But even listening through it, that song does jump out at you, like as being different than the rest of the album. Just how it flows and how just catchy it is.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird. It's kind of a weird song because it does have like an offbeat to it, and I know that like it's a Dr. Dre beat, but he originally made it for D12, and they passed on it because they were like, we're not sure how to use this. And then so when he played it for 50 Cent, 50 Cent made it a celebration song when Dr. Dre was expecting like something different lyrically. So he kind of flipped the beat on its head, right? Like it's an intense beat, but at the same time, it's like it's a club song, right? It's kind of weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that offbeat is so like it's so simple, but it's not in a lot of like a lot of pop music, right? It's not that common, but it's very simple. It's kind of like a Latin groove. It's just sweet that was slid into the beat. I'm sure it didn't come from that thinking. They're just like, oh, this feels good or whatever. But man, very simple, very effective, very like that is also a brilliant marketing song, but like think about it, like how many people put that on when it's their birthday? It's not even a birthday song. I mean, it's a club song, but it can be both, right? It's like,
but even and even lyrically, he's like, we don't care that it's not your fucking birthday. Like he's like, we're just here to celebrate.
Yeah, I remember like going to the club when this song was like new. They would play it 2-3 times in the night, and usually one of those times was because it was someone's birthday and they were dedicating. Like, oh, exactly. This goes out to Jennifer in the club. Happy birthday. And then,
that's brilliant.
For the third time that night. And no one cared. That was the other big thing. They played it, but no one cared. Everyone just loved it.
Yeah. I remember another group of friends that I had like around this time, whenever we were hanging out, it seemed like this song was like on repeat. Like people just like loved this song. It was so big in 2003.
It's one of those things where if I just start playing the drum beat, even though there's like no notes, it's just the drums, people automatically know, oh, it's that, right? It's just because of that rhythm is so simple, but it's so iconic. Like I haven't heard it in another song. You can't really put it in another song because it sounds too much like In the Club, which was too big, you know?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say this. Name me a song that has come out in the past 20 years that you'd say is bigger than that song and bigger than In the Club.
Yeah, no, I was thinking of this in context to like the 2000s, and I thought it was the biggest of the 2000s, but like it's such a distinct song that you could probably say of the last 20 years.
Yeah, because there are like other huge songs, don't get me wrong, but a song like this where you, like what Ryan said, I can't go probably a week without hearing it in someone's Instagram story or it being posted on Facebook somewhere, or, you know, oh, it's, blah, blah, blah's birthday, let's put on In the Club. You know, it's become like the birthday song.
It's got staying power, right?
Yeah.
It's become part of our it's become part of the regular culture. You know, it's not like some great songs just don't stick around for whatever reason. But I have a feeling this one, it's just gonna. Well, it already has been around.
I did like a search earlier today because I'm like, I wonder what like other people, because 50 Cent has talked about, the song is talked about, but I'm like, what do like younger people think of, 50 Cent and that whole era? And I came across like a Reddit thread and someone was like, what was it like in the G-Unit era, like the 50 Cent era? What was it like? And I had to agree with the top comment. The guy said, it's not comparable to anything now. That album, like this album was so big. It was the biggest selling debut album by any American artist ever. The songs were all number one. The songs were constantly on the radio. I'm like, you can't really, because like there is no comparison because artists like this don't exist anymore they're that big out of you know what I mean? Where it's just sort of globally embraced. Mm-hmm. Like this song was going number one all over the world. It wasn't just America. So it's hard to fathom something being this big nowadays.
Is that because of In the Club? In the Club.
Well, I think you got to think it's a multiple things. Of course, it's like his backstory. Eminem, Dr. Dre being like the two biggest hip hop artists, producers of that time. True. Like to put it in context, this, on the Billboard year-end number one albums, it goes like 2002 is the Eminem Show. 2003 is Get Rich or Die Tryin', 2004 is Confessions by Usher, but then 2005 is The Massacre by 50 Cent. So that's like the power that these guys had on the recording industry at that time.
Yeah.
Just dominant.
It just seemed that's all there. It almost feels like that's all there was for like a time. Like 50 Cent was just everywhere.
I think we can get into this a little bit later on, but is it just did Kanye West change that? Is this because it's like once Kanye West starting to release albums like 2004, 2005, and then it's starting to shift a bit. And I was on board with Kanye West from that first album, but then you get to 2007 where it's like they're having a record sale challenge and they're challenging each other. And Kanye West beat 50 Cent, and that was in 2007, and that was like kind of a big deal.
Yeah, and then and then 50 Cent after that was never sort of the same. Like musically, like he kind of went on and did his TV shows, and he's kind of big in, he had his Vitamin Water, but he hasn't really, musically, he hasn't really had anything pop. Not that he hasn't had good songs and good stuff that's come out since, but nothing like how big this was. It's crazy to think how it just sort of whisked away, like how
it's really dependent on style of the time, right? And actually kind of shaped the style of the time, obviously. So but that has a limited, shelf life. So once the style is no longer the most popular thing, if that's what you're leaning on, like either he's got to come back with like a new style and change it, or what? You're gonna just do the same? I don't know.
Well, when this album dropped too, it seemed like we were primed for it because everything leading up to this, with the whole Eminem and his and with the whole Dr. Dre 2001 and that aesthetic of his production, Dr. Dre production was sort of popping up everywhere. You had Snoop Dogg tracks, Exhibit tracks, Ice Cube came back. He was producing for Eminem, and then this was almost like the culmination of Dr. Dre beats, and he did like so many songs on here. He did In the Club, he did If I Can't, he did Back Down, he did like some of the best songs on here were all produced by Dr. Dre, and I believe he did other stuff for G Unit, like he did songs for The Game, and it's just so connected to that time, the whole Dre beat that where it kind of started in 2001 and prolonged through the G Unit era.
Yeah.
You go ahead, Gordon. You
can say like from like what 99 from when 2001 comes out up until about 2005 when The Massacre comes out, that like the Shady Aftermath like crown has like so many jewels in it. And it's like, this album might be the biggest of that era. But there's so many different, like you can name like 5 or 6 albums that are just the biggest albums ever. And they're all from that era. Yeah.
Because like when did the Marshall Mathers LP come out?
That's 2001.
2001. So 2 years before.
Or no, that was 2000.
2000,
yeah.
So there was a lot of huge, like this is when hip hop started to reign supreme in the mainstream, and Eminem and 50 Cent were huge parts of that.
Yeah, and you also had D12. D12 was popular, and there was a bunch of Dre beats on that.
Is that partially the result? Like, how does this figure into the history of like music distribution? Because downloading was really taking off around this time, so.
Well,
was rock music moving into the indie sphere at this time? So then the rap started to become the one thing on like the pinnacle of popular culture.
Well, I think artists like Eminem just kind of put it over the edge. Like when Eminem came out, it seemed like everyone became a rap fan overnight. Like a lot of people I knew that didn't really listen to any sort of hip hop.
White people. I'm just going to say
suburban white. Yeah. The average suburban white kid went from listening to Korn to Eminem. Like it was sort of at the same time. And then, which led into all the other hip hop at that time. And it just sort of reigned supreme with artists.
Which led into Baby Blue Adidas, or maybe that was 2000 yet.
But I think
the G-Unit shoes were Reeboks, I believe.
Right.
But I think around this time too, I remember Dr. Dre just being very much against like Napster, and for some reason I want to think he had something to do with creating iTunes, and he was like involved in that, or maybe he was one of the early people to adopt iTunes and be like having a subscription service. But Dr. Dre has always been very vocal about like against like downloading music illegally. I mean, rightfully so. It's his bread and butter.
but going back to like the album sales and downloading, an album like this sort of bucks the curve because these popular artists, doesn't matter if the downloading community downloads it, you're gonna have every mom and everyone's grandma's gonna be buying them 50 cent for Christmas, right? Like
right.
Like what should I buy the kids? What's the number one selling CD right now? 50 cent, I'll buy that. You know, it's you kind of start that frame. I'm sure a lot of 50 cent albums were gifts and, you know.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Like it could take it, you know, 50 Cent could, a lot of these huge rap artists could take the hit of the downloading, or it wasn't even such a big deal. Whereas like rock music kind of slid into embracing it because all these like indie bands were trying to distribute by themselves, you know, doing the MySpace thing.
But hip hop still comes from like the mixtape community, so they were used to handing out free music as well. So
that's true as well. Yeah.
And then just some trivia to throw on top of that. This album was actually pushed up a week just to avoid illegal downloading and leaks. I guess they were already out at that point, so they pushed it up.
That was a common thing because back then it'd be like, oh, this album's coming out next month, but then it leaks next week, so then you release it a week after that. It's a month
to maximize the sales.
Yeah, maximize the sales. But I don't know. I think this album was undoubtable. People would have bought it, even if you download it. Because for me, like I downloaded it initially and then I eventually bought it. So it's just one of those albums that everyone sort of had. It's almost like if you didn't buy it, it was mailed to you just to make sure you had it.
Right.
So I guess, okay. So I think we all agree that In the Club was the biggest song from this album. Is there a song that you think is overplayed, or thinking back, Ryan, is there a song that comes to mind when I say what's the most overplayed track?
Well, like, are you going to talk about singles? Because like
singles or whatever. I guess whatever you want.
You can't really have an overplayed B-side. Nobody's listening to it. But I'm thinking Pimp is a little bit repetitive, to be honest. So I'm not PIMP. It's not my favorite.
I'd have to say PIMP, I agree with you. It's very repetitive. And one of my issues with it was I preferred the remix with Snoop Dogg.
Oh, interesting.
I think that's the thing too. It's like I never really thought of it being repetitive because I think the version that you probably heard on the radio was always a Snoop Dogg remix.
And then the remix that's put on the deluxe version or the bonus songs, the one that's on Spotify at least, where it's the remix featuring Snoop Dogg, is different than the version in the music video with Snoop Dogg. Because in the music video, Snoop Dogg like spells out his name, right? You know, the part he doesn't do that in the remix version. So it's even that doesn't sound right to me. So I'm like, it's almost like that third music video version is my favorite.
Yeah, was the one on Spotify like a G-Unit remix? Like, was there more people on it?
I think it was just Snoop.
Okay, it's just a different verse, I guess, that he gives.
Yeah, it's just slightly different because I'm guessing for the music video they probably had an edited version where he rapped over it as well.
Right.
If you're going to release it as a single, why record a version that's only explicit? It makes no sense.
Yeah,
definitely. Like you cannot listen to the clean version of this album. It doesn't make any sense. It exists.
What? It exists, the clean version.
It does, and I don't understand why. Like I first put it on and I didn't understand it was a clean version. I was like, the rap sucks.
In the US, it wasn't like this in Canada, but in the US, especially during this era, Walmart and Target were not allowing the sale of any album with the parental advisory sticker on it.
Yeah,
so all these albums they had clean versions where it's almost like, why would anyone want to listen to the clean version of Eminem? But it existed. Yeah.
I don't know. So you could imagine getting that as a kid. Oh, thanks, Mom. Oh, it's the clean Eminem.
They didn't care when the rock bands swore, but when the rappers were swearing, they really started to care. I wonder what the difference was there.
You can have Eminem, though. He seems like a nice boy.
Eminem addressed it in his song White America.
Yeah.
So.
I find with the song like PIMP, it's probably the most overplayed. It's the one I think of like thinking back to like the popularity of this album and stuff like that. If we're not going to say In the Club is overplayed, which I don't think it is, but if we're not saying that one, then I'd probably put PIMP. I always thought of the song though as just it kind of feels like a distant cousin of the song Big Pimpin' by Jay-Z, even though when you listen to the two songs side by side, they're not really similar at all. Like maybe it's because the music video for Big Pimpin' is like they're out in the Caribbean having a great time, and you think there's steel drums in that song, but there's no steel drums in that song whatsoever.
Oh, you have like that do 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 do.
Yeah, it's not steel drums. That's like just like a Timberland, whatever Timberland does.
A song that I was going to include for the overplayed was, even though I love this song and the time away from it has made me like love it again, but back when this album came out, 21 Questions, I feel like that was just played a lot in the music. I remember seeing the music video like nonstop and just sort of kind of getting sick of it. It always sucks when there's a song you like and it comes up on the radio or on Much Music and you change the channel. And this song slowly became one of the 21 Questions slowly became one of those. But listening to the album now, I love it, and I'd agree with Ryan. PIMP is the more, just because the song is so repetitive.
Yeah, so if you put the song on twice, you're like, oh god, like it sounds cool at first with the steel drums and that like that clavinet kind of keyboard. It's just that's a nice mix of those sounds, but it's the same loop, and then like I think the chorus. The hook even follows like the steel drum thing. So it's like, oh my God, it's more of the same. So the first time you hear, you're like, all right, cool. You got to have like some amazing verses to pull that off. Because
even like when I would throw the song on throughout the years, I'd be like, oh yeah, PIMP, I love the song. And then I'd put it on. And then about 2 minutes in, I'm skipping it because he's just keep saying the same thing over and over again. And it's not that the song is just repetitive. And it also, at the time, it was my ringtone.
That's awesome. Just for going back to what you were saying about 21 Questions, I pretty much forgot about that song, and then when I heard it again, it's like, how did I forget about this song? So it's good to like spend some time away from it and then coming back to it, and then you like, since Nate Dogg passed away a few years ago, it's like just good hearing his voice again because you don't hear it as much anymore.
And also,
so it's a good song.
That's the other thing with 21 Questions, because at the time Nate Dogg sang a bunch of the hooks on 2001. So you're kind of like so used to hearing his voice. So it kind of with that same sort of, it's a mix. It's a change for the album. But at the time, during that era, it's like, oh, another hook by Nate Dogg.
Right. But in the context of the album, when it comes on, it's just like a sigh of relief. And not that I needed relief, but it's just like hard song. And then, we're in Sexy Land. It's like a slow groove. It's nice.
I agree. It's got good placement. Like I kind of forgot about it because it's like there's a lot of tracks on this album, but it's like right at the end. Like I think it's like almost like the second last song. It's got good placement. Yeah. And
I was when I was playing it on Spotify, like the Genius comes up and starts giving you the background of the song, and that's where it was saying how like 50 Cent he mixed it up and was getting into his love bag. He wasn't, because normally when he was saying like when you hear like in the song, you hear someone talk about a woman, it's always their bitch or their hoe, but he's actually talking about how he loves someone, and he's like, would you still love me if I did this, that, the other thing?
Yeah, right.
Do you love me like a fat kid loves cake?
Yeah.
Good line.
And it's a cool way to structure a song. Like it seems very, like I was saying earlier, it seems very much like something one of the artists from this era, or not this era, but people who came out after him, like it seems like Kanye West or Tyler the Creator would have a song where it's all based on a bunch of songs you're asking your girl. But it's more interesting coming from 50 Cent though.
Yeah. Thematically, it's a change, but also thematically, I could see like Drake doing this song today.
Well, the funny thing, you mentioned Drake. I saw a quote. He had one quote that I saw specifically about this song, and he's like, "This is probably my most inspiring example of a guy who's not supposed to be singing." So Drake, it's a Drake fave too.
Yeah, no, it's a great song. Like, it's a shame that it did get a bit overplayed back when it came out for me, but it is still. It's probably if you were to name the second biggest song off the album, it's got to be 21 Questions after In the Club.
Yeah.
So I guess that takes us to what's your favorite song from this album? Go for it, Denise.
This was it was interesting because I found listening through the album throughout the week, different songs kept jumping out at me. Like there's the classic ones that if you would have asked me prior to listening to the album, like preparing for this, I probably would have said "What Up Gangsta" and "If I Can't." And I also remember at the back and when this album came out, quoting "Poor Little Rich" a lot. But re-listening to it this week, "Gotta Make It to Heaven" and "High All the Time" jumped out as a couple of favorites as well. So if I had to narrow it down, I'd say it's probably "What Up Gangster," "If I Can't," and "Gotta Make It to Heaven" are probably my three favorites off of here.
Yeah, those are pretty good. It's funny how you mentioned like you go into it and you're like, I think this is my favorite. I'm going to call this one my favorite. And you listen to some other ones, and like I really went back to like "What Up Gangsta" a lot. Like it's a great opening track for him, knowing like where he's come from, like what he survived, and then he starts like right off the bat saying like he's got the S on his chest. So you guys are all thinking I got the S on my chest. Like that stuff is just awesome.
I know. I feel like I still quote those lyrics. Like I feel like I don't know in what context, but I feel like I still quote that song quite a bit.
Yeah, and like the other thing too, like going back to this album or revisiting this album, and like after we talked about Biggie like a few months ago, and it's like he's balancing like those Biggie lines, like he's like it's like "Jux me, have your mama picking out your casket" and stuff like that. It's like that's awesome. Like it sounds good. Maybe at the time it wasn't for me. I wasn't into it, but going into it now, it's like he's got humor in it. It's maybe not as funny as Biggie, but it's in the same vein and it works really well.
I love how he has like in "What Up Gangster," he just has in 50 Cent in general just has that like relaxed tone of rapping, but he's saying like the most gangster shit.
Yeah,
it's great.
How about you, Ryan? Do you have a fave?
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, "In the Club" is probably, if I had to choose a song, is like the best or my favorite. Like, but I mean, yeah, whatever. That's the single. I the hit single. I'm also a big fan of "Many Men." I like the singing in that is really, really good. And also, you know what is kind of weird? "If I Can't" and "Bloodhound," that part of the album is really good for the singing as well. And "Bloodhound" was that song where I was like, okay, this got a good first verse, and I know if 50 Cent sings, the chorus is going to be good. And as soon as it hit, I was like, yeah. But then later in the song, I was like, I could do without the like constant like dog grunting hound, that part of it. I understand it's called Bloodhound.
Well, that was also because Bloodhound was featuring, because Bloodhound, you have the triplets in it because you start getting the Southern because you have Young Buck on that song.
Yeah,
and the growling and the triplets is more of his style, which I was into at the time. I was like a pretty big Young Buck fan, but listening to this song, other than the hook, I couldn't really like Bloodhound. It felt dated, like almost.
Okay.
It's funny how you say that because I actually had that as my song that I skipped just because the beat kind of sounds out of place. Like maybe it's the sample or it's not like the smooth like kind of bass that you're hearing on like Dre beats and stuff like that. Like when it first hits, it's almost jarring, and no other track on this seems out of place in that regard.
Because you know what?
Interesting.
You know what that song is kind of like on this album? I'm going to make a comparison to the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's like in a movie when they want to introduce a new character. So they have like a scene where it's like, oh, this is Black Panther or some shit.
That's funny. That's a good way of comparing it.
It's his way of introducing Young Buck because this is an artist on his label. And I would say this song would probably fit better on Young Buck's album than it would. That's
interesting.
So it's almost like this is an introduction to Young Buck. I don't think it's a bad song, but Young Buck's album has a lot of better bops that have this same sort of aesthetic.
I like that. The G-Unit Extended Universe.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Gordon, you were talking about how it's like the beat's a little jarring.
Just maybe like right off the top, yeah.
So in "Poor Little Rich," I was wondering if you guys found those snare drum fills jarring, because it's kind of like a production question.
I think it's just of the era, because both those songs you both pointed out, like picked out, I have written sounds dated, because I think it's just of the era, like that early 2000s, late 90s sound. I don't know. Like I still like "Poor Little Rich." Like I love that synthy bass, and it's very portable.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very much of the time. I think that's what it is that you guys are hearing in those songs.
the other thing too that I mean I will give some credit to Bloodhound for is after hearing that song and then when it goes into the song right after to Back Down, that's like a classic Dre beat. So when you hear that, it like almost makes Back Down sound better, and it's just like it makes Bloodhound sound even more out of place.
That's interesting. I was digging Bloodhound a lot more than Back Down or Don't Back Down, whatever it's called. Back Down. Don't Back Down is Tom Petty.
I like Back Down because you get that. It kind of because with 50 Cent, you kind of have a rapper that's in almost two worlds because he's from New York, but he has Dr. Dre producing his beats, who's the West Coast. But I found even though it is Dre that did Back Down, right?
Yeah.
But it still has that like a New York hip hop feel.
Yeah.
When the bass comes in on that one, it's sick. Like it comes in right with the first verse, and it's like so low. That's probably my favorite part of the whole thing.
And I love the like the female G unit.
Yeah, I like the it's almost like a classic like Dr. Dre effect where he adds in little things. So like the part where he's like, I'm a motherfucking G Unit soldier, and it does like the drum roll like he's in the army. Like that's just vintage Dr. Dre right there.
That was also one thing I noted is probably one of the best moments in the song. But other than that, though, I wasn't a huge fan of that song. I don't know. This is weird though because you guys don't like guys don't like Bloodhound very much. So weird.
Yeah, I think for me, the Bloodhound is a whole where I can jump onto Young Buck's album and kind of get songs that kind of fit that vibe that are better done on there. Not that I know it's a whole different artist, but not like I jump back and listen to the G Unit era very often.
Yeah. Is there a song that you skip, Denise, on this track? I mean, if you had to.
PIMP, just because I like the remix, and Like My Style. And I had Like My Style. It sort of does mix it up a bit, but it feels like the whole song, like he holds on to the beat very well for how kind of it's sort of a different beat, but it seems like everything's going to fall apart at any moment. And I'm not really a fan of Tony Yayo either, so he kind of comes in at the end, and I don't really care for him. So
if you listen closely to the beat in that song, it's got this like goofy organ going on in the background, and I just don't understand why they decided to settle with that. It just I don't know. And the whole thing's about style, so I guess are they trying to like be good, but like play on what they're talking about? I didn't get it. I wasn't sure what the message was because the goofy organ was not stylish.
There are similar beats to like I don't know. There's something about that beat where they've kind of done something similar to it like on later albums, and I feel like it worked better on those. Whereas I don't know, that song I can't get into Like My Style. I just don't feel it. And then I felt the same with Don't Push Me. Just I wasn't a fan of the beat.
Yeah,
I thought Lloyd, and I thought the only good part of it was the Lloyd Banks verse. I thought Lloyd Banks fit the verse better than Dr. Dre did.
I actually have Skip beside Don't Push Me on this.
Yeah. Maybe that's another one of the he's introducing Lloyd Banks to the world.
Yeah, I find
but again, like when I was listening to that song today, though, it was hitting a bit better than it did throughout the week. But yeah, the Lloyd Banks part's pretty good. I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of Eminem beats. Like when Eminem does a beat.
Okay. Yeah, I was just about to say, like, I find his beats start to sound similar. Maybe that's why I thought it was like, as like a whole G Unit sound, it sounded like after a while, every song starts to sound like Patiently Waiting.
Yeah.
Like, in terms of like the beats.
Like even Patiently Waiting, I'm kind of like touch and go with, but there's so many good lines and stuff in that song that I kind of go back to it. Whereas when you jump to Don't Push Me, you'd think with it being 50 Cent, Lloyd Banks, and Eminem, it'd be a standout. But for me, it just sort of blends in. Other than the Lloyd Banks verse, I don't really care for it as much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you have a song that you skip, Brian? Did you mention one?
Oh yeah, I mentioned a couple. Like Pimp was the first one, or I guess it's overplayed.
Yeah.
But yeah, Don't Push Me. I just was just like, I guess I'll listen to the whole thing, but I really want to skip this. It's like I have to listen to them, but that one was one I don't know. It's just I guess there was nothing that special about it. I don't know. There was nothing that stood out. Like there was nothing, and you're right. Like I was like, okay, I think Eminem's verse is last, right? So like, okay, Eminem's probably got a good verse, and it just like kind of tapers off.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Started off good, but
yeah. Do you have an underrated song that you want to mention?
what's underrated? Well, I'm gonna say, given that you guys hate the song, like I'm pretty sure I should vote for Bloodhound. Underrated by you.
Is that what you had?
The chorus is
underrated?
good, man. The chorus, okay, let me tell you why it's underrated. The chorus hook is really good. Like just the note choice and control of the intonation of 50 Cent's voice in the chorus is really good because it's not totally in tune. It's like a subtle bend on a note. That's like a really good singing technique. I don't know. Maybe listen carefully to that chorus, you'll appreciate it more.
I'll revisit it.
Do it.
How about you, Anis? Do you have an underrated track you want to shout out?
I'll shout out "Gotta Make It to Heaven" because I thought it was a good song and it's a good closer. I think the version I have has the 3 bonus tracks of Wanksta, Like Me, and On the Line. But I find Gotta Make It to Heaven is a good closer. I like the beat. I like how it's get rich or die trying, and he's like kind of ready to die, but at the end he's still like gotta make it to heaven, like because of all the shit he did, he's still unsure. But no, it has a good beat. I love the way 50 Cent attacks the beat. It's like he's, for someone who's, I like his relaxed style, that song is more kind of ferocious on the beat as opposed to some of the other tracks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, his verses, that was one where I feel like it flipped. Like the verses were actually better than the hook. The hook's kind of like, all right, not a standout, but the verses are good.
For me, the hook was more sort of like, because the song had that sort of pace where it's almost like he's scrambling and gotta make it to heaven, gotta make it seem more along those veins as opposed to something where everyone can sing along to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally forgot that. I totally forgot that Wanksta wasn't on this album because it came out like right at the same time. So I thought it was like the second single released from this album.
No, it's from the 8 Mile soundtrack.
Yeah, it's from the 8 Mile soundtrack. It's just included in like bonus versions, but like, yeah, I thought it was. I was waiting for that track when I first listened to this album, and then I realized after it's not on this album.
Well, with Wanksta, that's another song where I think because of the name was like a term people used at the time that kind of went away right away. So when you think of the song as like Wanksta, it's kind of become almost like a punchline as opposed to a term people use. But when you listen to the song, it's a good song.
Yeah, it's still pretty solid. I think, is he credited with like inventing that word? I mean, he probably made it famous, but like the wannabe gangsta.
I don't know, maybe.
I just think of Ja Rule and like that era, like the beef, the feuding, the music video.
Yeah.
For my underrated, I put I had Heat. Just because you gotta respect creating a beat with loading a gun and firing it.
Yeah. That was a great video. It's not on the clean version.
Yeah, so on the clean version, that song's just completely missing.
That was one that's back in the day, because you're young and you're dumb and the song has a gunshot, so it makes it instantly cooler, and the lines are so violent, so it's kind of fun. It's almost fun in a humorous way to sing along. Humorous for a person living in Canada in the suburbs.
Right.
but not that I'm laughing at the plight of the poor man or anything, but I'm just the actual...
No, I thought it was a joke. Like, I thought the song was a joke, and when I saw the video, I was okay, it's probably a joke.
Probably a joke, but it kind of gets repetitive too. I think it kind of falls into the PIMP thing where the beat is kind of cool and interesting, but then the song kind of goes on for 4 minutes.
I know when I played for my wife, because like you were saying, like laughing at it and like not laughing at it, but laughing with it and hearing the lines from it, like play this tape in court, I don't give a fuck, I'll kill you, like all that stuff is just like hilarious. And then when I played it for my wife, I'm like, do you think this song's great? And she's like, do the gunshots stop? And I'm like, no, it's the beat.
This was one of the songs outside of like the big singles. This was one of only maybe like 2 or 3 songs where I remembered like the lyrics like from top.
You should have played her to the video. Like, it makes more sense. The video.
Yeah, maybe I should have played the video. Does it have an official video?
I think it's like was just released on YouTube. I remember it having a video.
Okay, so it's not an official video. It was on 50 Cent's like YouTube page. So I was like, okay, this has got to be official. It's pretty funny. Like it's just him in front of a green screen, in front of like really crappy animation, faking like Grand Theft Auto. And it's like people playing video games, and they're basically just going through the city, you know, doing the Grand Theft Auto, being gangsters, right? But it's clearly a joke because it's 50 Cent like crappy rapping in front of a green screen. You guys haven't seen this? Hilarious.
I think I remember seeing it when I was a long time ago.
I'm pretty sure I've seen it.
Yeah. I remember seeing it and being like, wait, this isn't like an official like music.
It is.
They would never play on much music.
Maybe it isn't. I don't
know. So do you guys have any other song questions? I know we already hit the song you'd skip. We kind of went out of order with that, but is there any other songs you wanted to talk about or mention?
I know it's not really a song, but it's just the intro. I know it's 6 seconds and it's just the sound of a coin dropping, but I have to listen to it before What Up Gangster.
That's funny because when I first put the album on, like I put it on YouTube, it was just stupid. I was like, oh, let's listen on this YouTube. Bad idea because it's like starts off, it's clean, whatever. But it skipped the intro track. I'm like, what the hell? There's an intro track. And then I go back and it's 7 seconds of just getting your gun ready. I'm like, oh, okay. Good thing I went back.
Yeah, I can see why they made it its own track because, like, when you hear, I mean, it works together. Like, track 1 and track 2 work together. But, like, if you just want to hear the one song, the way What Up Gangster builds and the drums, like, the way the beat kicks off, it's better just to kind of start it clean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a good opening. I like the sound and then What Up Gangster. It's a good opening. It's a solid opening.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember Patiently Waiting being like a big song, but I think it was more of the remix. Like, I think there's a remix with like all the G-Unit guys on it.
Yeah. Because back then there were so many remixes and they were popping up on songs, and Bad Boy re-released like they had their 10-year anniversary and there was a Notorious with 50 Cent and Lloyd Banks on it. It seemed like, yeah, there's so much stuff they were releasing back then.
There was also I never owned it. I just knew the big songs from it, but there's an 8 Mile soundtrack. And then I think there's a couple volumes, or there's at least a second, like more songs inspired by 8 Mile. And it had like more 50 Cent and G-Unit songs on it.
Because I was kind of curious. I'm like, how soon did all this stuff come out? And when you go back and look, you have Get Rich or Die Tryin'. And then 6 months later, Beg for Mercy, the G-Unit album comes out. A few months after that, you have Lloyd Banks' album comes out. A few months after that, you have Young Buck. Few months after that, you have The Game, and then, or 50 Cent's second one, and then The Game. But yeah, it was just like a 2.5 year span, and they just released like so much. And it pretty much started with Get Rich or Die Tryin'. And in my eyes, like the peak, I know it kind of went on to Massacre and stuff, ended with the documentary by The Game. But those were my two favorite. The documentary by The Game was also really good. And it had a lot of good 50 Cent hooks on that album as well.
Yeah, his verse in Hate It or Love It is like good. Like Hate It or Love It is just an amazing hip hop song.
Yeah, but that's another album you can just put on and just let it play through, and it's hit after hit after hit. And you have to think that was what 2.5 years in for G-Unit, and they were still able to churn out all these great songs. Like I know it's a bunch of different artists, but it's pretty impressive. Like 50 Cent fingerprints overall of it. And Dr. Dre and
like hearing you talk about it, it's like, did Disney like see this business model and think MCU?
I know, it's pretty much what it is. That's like they would introduce, you hear Lloyd Banks and Young Buck and Tony Yayo on this, and then they show up on their solo albums, and on Young Buck's album, there's like The Game is on it, and then The Game's album comes out. It was very strategic, but it was well done, and
50 Cent's like Thor.
Yeah,
Eminem's Captain
like
America. Iron Man. Dr. Dre's Iron Man. But yeah, that's hilarious. So yeah, for this album, I don't own this album, so I don't know what the liner notes look like, but I did see a note somewhere that so basically the album cover is 50 Cent standing there with like his diamond cross. He's got the gun holster, and there's a gunshot with broken glass, like with a gunshot through it, and it's meant to show like obviously like he's bulletproof, he can survive gunshots. But then if you look carefully, like the art designer, I saw a quote saying like if you look right in the middle of the circle of the gunshot is where the diamond cross is, and then he's also wearing like a Gucci gun holster. So that's supposed to represent like the get rich part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some interesting symbolism with the album cover.
Yeah, but he's more known to me with the bulletproof vest on.
He is, yeah. It's funny because like at the end of I watched the movie this week, the Get Rich or Die Trying. So you see him at the end. He comes out and he's like full 50 Cent. He's got the bulletproof vest on, and then spoiler alert, he like takes the vest off at the concert and throws it away, and then he finishes the song. He doesn't need the vest, so that's how the movie ends. But yeah, that when he put on the vest in that, and it's been a while since I've like seen him wearing it or doing that, because I mean, we can talk about this after, but it seems like he's not really known for music now, or that whole G-Unit thing. He's kind of softened his image a little bit. So seeing that, it's like, oh yeah, that's like classic like 50 Cent right there.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's kind of softened his image, but didn't soften his image, because now he's, he directs his show and produces what's it called, Ghost, or what was it called?
Power. He was
Power, but now it's like the spin-off show that he produces. But he's still a troll online, and I love it.
Yeah,
he's a good follow on Instagram and everything. He just kind of calls people out who owe him money, or he had his ongoing feud with Floyd Mayweather, and then I don't know, some stuff he does is like sort of mean, but it's sort of funny at the same time. Growing up with 50 Cent, he was always a shit disturber.
Exactly.
He came out of the lineage of Eminem, who was also a shit disturber when he came out, and he still doesn't. And it's still, I don't know, it's funny because he's usually in the right a lot of times, or he's, I don't know.
Imagine if those guys had Twitter when they were releasing the albums, like those albums,
man.
Of course.
Oh man, it would be great.
Craziness.
It's almost like we missed out, because I see some of the newer hip hop artists, some of the shit they post online is, maybe it's not the best thing, like they shouldn't be starting beefs, and 50 Cent was horrible for beefs, but it would have been cool seeing these G-Unit guys on like Twitter and Instagram during their peak. Would have been hilarious.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, probably would have been pretty funny. I mean, yeah, 50 Cent is known. I mean, when I say soften his image, he's really good at balancing it in the way like, okay, yes, he's known for getting shot 9 times and surviving that, and being a drug dealer when he was a kid, and then this rough image of like this album or like the whole G-Unit era. But at the same time, he's like, he's also like very business savvy. So he'll do like philanthropy where he's trying to feed 1 billion people in Africa over like a certain period of time. And I remember one thing that one of the first things I remember seeing him that kind of changed his image was there's like this YouTube channel. I think Anise, you might have showed it to me, but there's this kid, he just like kind of does like his own lip syncing to like famous songs. And then there's one where he just walks out of the closet and he's like in the video with this kid.
That's when literally, if you saw me trying to search on my computer, I was searching for that video.
Yeah, what's it? Awesome. I searched his name. It was like Kenneth Cahill?
Keenan.
Keenan, yeah.
Down on Me. But yeah, that was one of the best, because it was probably like over 10 years ago now, but he's kind of lip syncing to the 50 Cent song, and then 50 Cent pops up in the back of his bedroom.
Because this kid, he like literally sits in his bedroom, like doing these lip sync battles. So that's why people watch these videos. And then, 50 Cent out of nowhere just shows up and is rap battling with them, or
that's awesome.
Lip sync battling with them. I mean, 50 Cent has done some shitty things like posting like sex tapes on social media and getting sued for that. But like he's also done some hilarious things. Like I know more recently, his on again, off again feud with Ja Rule. He bought like the first 4 rows of his concert and just vacated them. I mean, Ja Rule probably doesn't care because those seats are sold, right? Like he doesn't care who buys them.
He probably cares. He's like,
but seeing nobody there for the first 4 rows.
Behind me, you can see the video that Gordon was talking about.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So you cut to like a minute in, or halfway through.
But yeah, it's kind of shitty. You can't really see it, but so we won't.
Yeah, look it up, but it's cool.
You won't get taken down by YouTube. But yeah, see, 50 Cent pops in.
It's pretty funny.
That's great. Yeah, I also think of, like I mentioned, I think of him as one of the veterans of like, this era, but also more recently as a businessman. I think probably because of the whole like seeing him on interviews, like on talk shows and stuff, and with the vitamin water, I just kind of started to think of him. Oh, he's just like not really a rapper anymore. He's just like a business guy. But I don't know. He's still featured in tracks occasionally, right?
He did that. I know last year when Pop Smoke, the rapper Pop Smoke, died. I don't know if Pop Smoke wanted this, or I forget how it came about, but 50 Cent produced his last album. So like post his death. So he kind of like got the beats and got people on it and stuff, and he kind of released it, and all the money went to Pop Smoke's family. So I was actually kind of surprised when I was talking to a friend and I told him we're going to be covering Get Rich or Die Trying, and he said, "Oh, isn't 50 Cent retired now?" And I'm like, "Is he retired now? Like, does he not make music anymore? Like, he just seems like he's
vitamin water."
Yeah, but it just seems like he's still around. Like at least in my, everyone kind of lives in their own internet world, and because I follow him and I still, pay attention whenever he does anything. I've never watched any of his TV shows. I've thought about it, but he just seemed like he was still releasing stuff, and I was surprised to see it's been 2014 was his last album. Like, it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's like almost 7 years. But he seems to have like a presence. Like you sent an article to us before we were doing this recording, and it was on Complex, I guess, and it's just talking about how he's kind of present everywhere. Like, even though he's not making music anymore, he's still in movies. He's like, everybody talks about his performance in Den of Thieves. I haven't watched Power, but everybody talks about that show. He's on interviews. Like, you watch Colbert interviews. Like, I think the last interview I saw was he was on Stephen Colbert's late night show, and he's like charming as hell. He's got the crowd into it. Like, he works on, he plays with his image a bit, but he's also like not afraid to laugh at it. So he's really business savvy. And like, if you look at his Wikipedia, it's like his business ventures and his investments, that part of it is longer than his music section now.
Yeah, it's good for him. Like, he's one of the, one of those celebrities that I sort of like half followed his whole career, and it's always been entertaining. He's always doing something different. He's always relevant. He's funny. He's charismatic, like you were saying. So whenever he has an interview, you kind of want to tune in because you don't know what he's going to say and who he's going to say it. And like, sometimes it just seems like, it's not like he's the nicest guy. Like, I remember when he was it a year or two ago, he was calling out Busta Rhymes for being fat on his on his IG, and it's sort of like mean, but I don't know, just the way he does it, it comes off almost like a comedian is doing it. It doesn't really come off mean spirited. And then when Busta Rhymes got into good shape again, he posted that and said, "Oh shit, look at him."
No. He's definitely built this thing where he like more or less can't be canceled. Like, I think comedians can do it, or people who push the boundaries, or maybe who have done that in their earlier work and don't do it as much anymore, but they can still get away with bullying or calling somebody fat or doing whatever. But like, it's like, good, cancel me. Like, I don't care. Like,
it's too late.
Well, I know this was brought up. I forget which radio show this was brought up on, but how 50 Cent, how they were talking about how he sort of ruined New York rap because of the way he is with his trolling and beefing, he was just beefing with everyone. So at one point, like, no New York rappers were working together because
he spoiled the well.
Yeah, because G-Unit was the biggest shit. So he had like Ja Rule and the Murder Inc. and a couple other people that he was beefing with, and it became like, hey, if you work with them, you can't work with us. And they were the biggest thing. So it sort of created this whole whose side are you on? And all of a sudden it became important, like, are you on Team Murder Inc. or Team G-Unit? And it's like, really? Like, you guys should be working together. Like, you guys are so big right now. Why are you guys worried about petty things? But it's the way the world is, and it's sort of, because like now, like we even brought up in the Biggie episode, like what New York rappers are there really now? Like, you have like your Griselda guys coming up, but other than that, it's like we had Pop Smoke who unfortunately passed away last year, but I'm not the deepest into it, but I can't even think of any. It seems like it's all Atlanta or California.
Yeah. Or you're just listening from those classic guys, like you're just waiting for the next Nas or Tang release or something like that.
Yeah, like those guys are still releasing, and their stuff's still solid usually. Yeah. And again, like what Gordon brought up for 50 Cent for himself, that whole when Curtis came out and going head to head with The Graduation, and The Graduation sort of outselling it kind of killed that wave.
It was a change. Yeah. That was the chapter, the shift for sure. Because definitely Kanye West's aesthetic is like not 50 Cent's style. If you compare the style of this album to Kanye West's first album, like, no, this is a different approach, right? So
I found it funny too, because on that album, The Graduation, they had their whole lead up where it was sort of like a marketing thing, like who's going to win, who's going to sell more. But then on The Graduation, on The Good Life, Kanye quotes 50 Cent.
Yeah.
Go ahead and switch the style up, and if they hate, and let them hate, and watch the money pile up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the whole thing with reading back on it now, I thought it was something that just kind of came together. But this whole thing that whole challenge was provoked by 50 Cent. Like he was like, if he sells more than me, I will retire. And then after he lost, he's like, no, it's just like to drum up publicity. Like, I'm not retiring from music. Yeah. So like it's business savvy.
But in a way, that was the end.
It's kind of a turning point.
He sealed his fate.
I mean, I think it was inevitable though, because like, I mean, you got to think like those first three Kanye West albums are masterpieces, and then I think Kanye West outdoes himself with like the next three. So it's like Kanye West was still rising very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You can see, Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy in the background there.
Yeah.
Love that album.
Imagine if 50 Cent was on that album. That would have been awesome.
Oh man.
Whoa.
Have they ever done song? They did one song together, right?
I don't know.
What was that one song with
I know
Eminem, Drake, 50, or was it Lil Wayne and what was the name of that? I can't remember the name of the song.
When I tried, I don't think they had a song together. I know Kanye had a song with like The Game, who was G-Unit at. Well, I don't think he was even G-Unit at that time. I don't think they have a song together, but it's surprising. It seemed like they were both working with a lot of people back then.
Yeah. Yeah, I know they worked with like a lot of the same people and stuff, but I don't think they've actually done one song together.
No. When you search, all that comes up is, because I didn't think they did, but when you search, all that comes up is that feud. Because there's a bunch of articles written in 2017 of like 10 years later. Yeah,
that was like so big. Like,
yeah.
What was it? Like September 07?
It's like the MTV Awards or something. They came like face to face.
It's like a weigh-in.
But I think ultimately they're not like they're friends or something. I don't think they hate each other or anything like that. It was just,
I don't think I've ever heard of beef.
Like songs.
Yeah.
But I've never heard of beef though, like an actual like shots fired or anything like that.
I imagine they're fans of one another.
Yeah, I would think so too. I mean, even in the first, I think one of the very first Kanye West songs I heard, like he's quoting like it's like dyslexic kids saying 21 questions, but they're saying 12. Yeah, 12 questions. I'm messing up that rhyme, but I remember that.
And then The Good Life, again, he quotes the line I said earlier. So you have to be a fan.
And I kind of remember too, for when I first heard about Kanye West, it was kind of in the same vein as 50 Cent, because like 50 Cent was somebody who was shot 9 times and survived that. And then you hear Kanye West and it's like, there's this guy, he like got into a car accident, broke his jaw, and he raps like one song with like his jaw wired shut. And it's like, oh man, you got to suffer like a life-threatening injury to be successful now.
You need a good origin story nowadays.
You do, yeah. And then it's funny because like, I mean, Kanye West more or less explains it like on the last track of College Dropout, like his whole origin story. But yeah, enough about Kanye for now. So how often is this 50 Cent album in your rotation, Anis?
It's more so the singles for this. Like even going back listening to like the non-single tracks, I was sort of like, shit, it's been a while. Mm-hmm. Like songs like Heat, I would still gravitate towards, but in my head that was almost like a single because the amount I listened to it at the time. But yeah, it's just mainly the singles, but it's also just when I go back to revisit like 50 Cent, it's almost like that G-Unit era. So if I'm ever jumping back into my early 2000s bag to listen to some hip hop from that era, I will play song like, because I have one of the Spotify playlists that's literally called 2000s hip hop or something that I follow, and it has a lot of these songs on it. Whereas sometimes if a 50 Cent song comes on, like if, In the Club pops on, I'll be like, oh shit, let me jump back and listen to Heat, or let me listen to this. So this was like the first time in a long time that I went back from top to bottom. So yeah, it's mainly it's usually just singles, and it's usually because we're of that era. So whenever we're partying, at some point, someone's gonna bust out In the Club or bust out something from this era, which will lead into 10 other songs from this era.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, you put it In the Club at this point, it's like almost like one of those moments where somebody throws on like Gangsta's Paradise by Coolio. It's like, oh, you got to like listen to it, right?
Definitely. Yeah, it's one of those for sure.
And then everyone starts singing. It isn't just you put on In the Club. You can put on In the Club and there could be 5 people in the room you've never met before. But
they all love it.
You'll all know it. You'll all start singing. Someone might even say, oh, I hated this song, and then start singing it.
Yeah.
That's so true. I mean, for me, I don't own it, but like on Spotify, like, yeah, I'll do like, I wasn't like big into the whole G Unit thing. And I think Kanye West probably was a big reason why. But if I do, I'd probably more likely listen to it in like a 2000s playlist, something like that.
Yeah.
Or the era, like, or yeah, we're all hanging out at somebody's house and we're just watching like YouTube videos and playing like random songs. Like, yeah, we'll do a tour of this and that. The album though, I'm not afraid to listen to this album. Like if I'm in the mood for this album or if I want to do it, like this is probably the one album of this era that I'm like not afraid. Like if I had to make a list of 5, this would probably be like number 3 on it.
I think I'll probably come back to this a bit, but not the whole thing because it is pretty long. So I'll probably just pick out bounce around on my favorite tracks. There's a few that I have, like, since it's so fresh to me that I have to listen carefully to get more of the rhymes because, like I was saying way earlier, that his articulation, he's not known probably for being the clearest lyricist.
Well, no, I think it's pretty clear. It's just he's lazy on some
used
songs.
to it.
Yeah.
But the one-liners are so good, it makes me want to get in there and really capture the rest of it. So
another thing I'll recommend if you really like this album is listen to the documentary by The Game.
Yeah, you were saying that.
It's also very very of the same vein, but I would say some of the songs are better, and I'd say even some of the rapping is better.
Yeah. Like this album isn't, for me, it doesn't stand out as, oh, you got to listen to this verse in this track. Like I wouldn't be pointing out particular raps. Whereas like if it was a Biggie album, I'd be like, okay, this, check out this rap. But I mean, it is still fresh for me, so that could still happen. But I don't know. What do you guys think about it?
I think it's a pretty solid album. It's funny listening to, like, I never really listened to 50 Cent albums beginning to end other than this album. So this week I went and listened to like his first 4 albums, and it's on the next album, The Massacre. It's like his voice, it's more relaxed. Like on this one, you can tell he's almost like carrying a weight with him, and it makes it like a more raw experience. And then when you get to The Massacre, it's almost like his voice sounds different. It's just like not looser. It's just, yeah, I call it more relaxed. So I feel like he's kind of like let something go, or I mean, maybe that's just what success does to you.
Well, my thing with The Massacre was, like I was saying on Get Rich, some of these songs like In the Club or 21 Questions, they kind of function as pop songs because the hooks are so good and the beats are not your standard like New York hip hop. It was more of like the flavor of the later 90s, and when Dre brought in his production style and everything with the Chronic. Whereas when you got to The Massacre, some of the singles were almost, other than being rap songs that had like a pop flavor to it, it was almost like they were pop songs with rapping. Like when you got into like AO Technology and some of that stuff, it didn't have the same sort of feel. It felt more like it was more calculated than In the Club. Whereas like they were arguing of what single to, like, should it be In the Club or If I Can? Whereas on the next album, it seemed like the singles were pretty much
like
pre-decided sort of thing, which might not be true, but it might have been because like those songs were produced by Timbaland and stuff. So they're obviously spending more money for those songs.
Right. And when you get to that, like that's Curtis. That's the one that went up against the Kanye West album.
Sorry.
Yeah. But like, yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying. Cause like by the time you get to that album, like AO Technology is more talking about him, or he's rapping about like just sleeping with women. And like, it's less about like killing people and he's less threatening. I felt less threatened listen to that album, but it seems like AO Technology is a good kind of like bookmark for that album, because the rest of the songs kind of like lyrically sound similar. Like it's not like anything that you hear from the first two albums, especially not this album.
That's right. I mixed up. Yeah, the second album still had some bops, like with Disco Inferno and Candy Shop, Gatman, and like on that album, I think like the song with Eminem on there, Gatman and Robin, is a better Eminem produced song than either of the two on Get Rich or Die Tryin.
Yeah. And you got to think too, like this album was so successful that it had like a fucking movie. Like that's how big it was. Like it launched like his, like it's just crazy seeing the logo when you're watching that movie. It comes up, it's like Shady Aftermath Interscope Production. It's like, was this company just invented to make this movie? And it's like MTV's behind it and everything like that. And that's how big this album was. I mean, his origin story is we could call it an origin story, but his like life story is like interesting enough to be made into a movie. But it's just crazy how it worked out like that.
I was looking at, it was just also funny looking at, I'm trying to find where I saw it here, but with the biggest selling albums for the year, like you brought up early how it was Get Rich or Die Tryin was the biggest selling album of 2003.
Mm-hmm.
It's just interesting when you look down at like number 6 or 7, I'm trying to find the exact order. It was like Beyonce.
Right.
So it's weird to think like to get an idea of how big 50 Cent is, like think of how big, I know it was Beyonce's debut solo album and whatnot.
Still Destiny's Child related.
But it's like at the time, if you were going to invest in any of these people, you probably would have threw your money in all the 50 Cent stock over any of the Beyonce stock at the time.
For sure. Oh, that was like the style was definitely what I thought of when I thought of like MTV at that time, or Much Music at the time. It was dominated by that, G-Unit style, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Here's
so
top selling. Yeah, it went 50 Cent. This is actually kind of funny looking back. It goes Get Rich or Die Tryin, then Come Away With Me by Norah Jones, Stripped by Christina Aguilera, Number One's Michael Jackson, Meteora Linkin Park, and then Dangerously in Love Beyonce. A Rush of Blood to the Head Coldplay, then Evanescence, Britney Spears, Avril Lavigne. Quite the mix of stuff.
Yeah.
I know back then I would have been like, yeah, that Coldplay album is really good.
I thought you were more of an Evanescence guy.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Oh God, is that their second album? Oh my God.
I guess that would have been like the Radiohead. What, Hail to the Thief? That was that year, right?
Yeah, so what was the first Radiohead? I bought OK Computer that year, and then Hail the Thief came out, so I bought it like right around the same time. And I just remember being like, buying OK Computer and being like, this is hard to listen to, and then listening to it again and again. It's like, okay, no, this is like really good. There's a lot going on here. So that's how I remember like 2002, 2003 being like full rock. when it should have been, or I should have been balancing. But it was hard back then because like unless you were heavy into downloading, you probably didn't find certain music or the right music. Much Music was my biggest influence.
Yeah, I think for me, like it kind of came up in the Deftones episode where we're talking about how like we listened to new metal, but we weren't really that big into it. We kind of liked some of the songs and albums. So I think at that time, since the popular rock music was new metal, that's why I was probably more open to stuff and got into like more of the hip hop stuff in the late 90s and early 2000s because, it was either you're going to listen to Godsmack or 2001 by Dr. Dre. You're going to listen to Puddle of Mud, or you're going to listen to 50 Cent, Get Rich or Die Tryin. So at the time, well, not that there wasn't other music, but on the main,
you find it later.
Yeah. So on the mainstream sort of thing. So I think that's why, for me, I feel like getting into hip hop was big at this time, and 50 Cent was the biggest.
Yeah. So I guess, did you guys have any like final thoughts before we ask the question?
We're not doing the rank.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So how do you? We kind of touched on it, but where do you rank this in 50 Cent's discography?
I rank it a little differently because I'm not as, like I was saying, I'm not as well versed in the 50 Cent. So I'm going to rank it for G Unit albums that came out.
Go for it.
In that era. Okay, so the top, I'm putting the documentary by The Game. Then second, I'm putting Get Rich or Die Tryin. Then
always fall in second.
Then what? Then number 3, I'm putting Young Buck's solo album, Welcome to Cashville, just because I love that album when it came out, listened to it nonstop. Then Beg for Mercy, then Lloyd Banks. Not that I didn't like Lloyd Banks' album, it just didn't hit as hard as the other ones for me personally. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I'm not the biggest like 50 Cent. I should have did it something like that too, just to, like a general overview. I mean, if I had to rank the 50 Cent albums, though, I'd probably rank them in order of release. I think the quality kind of, or maybe my taste just kind of tapered off from the rest of it. But yeah, this album's standout.
It did seem like for him, like he kind of just kept doing his thing, which was fine. Like, not like his thing was bad or anything, but he didn't sort of, probably because he was beefing with so many people, he wasn't jumping on any waves. He wasn't working with people. Like, whereas on, I feel like I'm keep bringing up the documentary, but on the documentary, you have a song produced by Kanye West, whereas you never got anything like that with 50 Cent. So,
yeah, it's like his way or the highway.
Yeah, it seemed like he cut off too many people, and maybe he did. I don't think they did, but like it just seemed like he was working with Timbaland and Eminem was producing songs for him.
But wasn't the first like Timbaland, was AO Technology like the first Timbaland beat, or did he do stuff with Timbaland before that?
I guess that might have been the first. But
because I remember that song being big because they were working together.
Okay, I thought he produced a couple of songs on that album. I'm probably remembering wrong.
I don't know. It's been a while.
Timbaland was everywhere too, so it's and AO Technology sort of blended in with all the other stuff he was releasing at the time. But I guess no, he didn't really work with Timbaland a lot, but it seemed like he did.
And I don't know, how did you listen to any other 50 Cent stuff this week, Ryan, or how would you rank?
No, I just went through this album, so I'm going to say this is his best album. I'm assuming it is, though. Like, I mean, this is the one that I most associate with him, like with the album cover and all the imagery and all the singles. This is what I know of 50 Cent. I couldn't even name a single off the next album.
Yeah. What was it? Magic Stick?
Disco Inferno?
No, there's one question I want to ask you though, Ryan, since this was kind of your first experience with this album. Did it exceed your expectations, or did it land where you thought it would, or how do you feel about it?
It exceeded because I was going into it thinking, all right, I gotta be honest about this. So if I don't like it, I'm gonna have to shit talk an album this whole podcast. But that's not the way it turned out. At first I was like, "What up, gangsta?" I'm like, okay, I'm not actually a huge fan of that song. It might actually be a skip for me. I was like, okay, the verses are okay. Like, all right. And then I'm like, oh, he's not a bad singer. That was like the first note I made, and like that kind of like changed my perspective of how I thought about it. I wasn't looking for like those sweet, awesome one-liners, even though they kept coming up here and there. It was more like I was listening to them as songs a little bit more. For a rap album, they're really singy songs, you know?
Mm-hmm. So I guess with that, we can ask the question, is this album essential? Who wants to go first? I can go first whatever you guys want.
Oh, go for it, Gordon.
So yeah, I think it's essential, just because I think when I first heard this album, I approached it kind of with the same attitude that Ryan had, and I was a little bit skeptical of like if I'll like it, or if it's basically like everything I've heard on the radio is like all there is to it, with his image and all that. And yeah, it definitely won me over on the first listen. I was really impressed, and I'm not afraid to visit this album. So I think it's essential. And if you take it in the context of the other G Unit albums, like that Shady Aftermath run from like that 5 or 6 year run, this is one of the top albums in it. Like, yeah, the documentary's really good. 2001's a masterpiece. But like, this album stands out, and I think it stands on its own. And I think people need to respect that. And I know people, maybe if you're not like a 50 Cent fan, you might be quick to be like, oh, I don't like 50 Cent or whatever. But if you do like hip hop, I think there's something to this album that you'll enjoy, or you'll come away with liking.
Okay.
How about you, Ryan? I want to hear your answer, since this is your first experience.
I'll go next. Well, it's interesting that you keep mentioning it, like that you're not afraid to listen to this album, as if that you might be afraid to listen to this album. You might be afraid to put on an album with more gunshots than you've ever heard before. I don't know.
I'm too threatened, yeah.
Well, I think where Gordon comes, I know where Gordon's coming from by saying that, because especially at the time, it seemed weird at the time saying you were a 50 Cent fan, not because he wasn't making good music or anything. It's just because he was so big. Like, they even say it, like it seemed like so much came with it. Whereas, and then like looking back now, especially for people of our generation, like 50 Cent represents something it's almost like we don't even understand it yet, because he's still fairly new. We haven't really, like, there's been echoes of people who are kind of trying to not copy his thing, but like, you have your Pop Smoke, who kind of had the same aesthetic, where you have the other extreme, 6ix9ine, who's took the trolling to the next level, and ended up working with 50 Cent. They did a song together, which was like whatever that was. So he's kind of fits in a weird spot, because a lot of the stuff that happens on this record, like the production of it, is more so attributed to people like Dr. Dre or Eminem. But then he was singing these hooks, and he had these songs, and I was almost like in the Gordon camp, where even though I was the one who picked this album and I was a fan of this album and I knew I liked it, going in to listen to it again, I'm like, what am I going to think about this after all these years? Because this isn't like, it seemed like Kanye West came out the year after, but it almost felt like it was 10 years apart. Just because of the change. Yes. Just because of the change. I feel like I took over Ryan's.
You did, but that's okay. You got to my point.
But it feels like it's almost like there was a 10-year gap between Get Rich or Die Tryin and the College Dropout. And it's not anything against 50 Cent, because he did something different, and he did something good, and he did something that a lot of people enjoyed. Just that when Kanye West came out a year later, it seemed like he pushed the boundaries out. So all of a sudden, like 50 Cent was working in this playground, and then Kanye West came out, and that playground just became doubled in size. And now all of a sudden he wasn't hip hop anymore. He was a corner of it, because there was so much more that was being explored, especially in the mainstream. But one of the reasons it was in the mainstream was because this album is so big. Like, it's just the whole domino effect. And since hip hop had been bubbling for so long, like all throughout the 80s and 90s, that when it finally did hit, it just seemed like there were so many avenues to explore. And 50 Cent kind of filled in that gap between the East Coast, West Coast, New York rappers. He was a little bit of Biggie, a little bit of Pac. He was a little bit of everything. And then we got Kanye West, which was something different. And not to equate them, but they are probably the two biggest hip hop rappers from 2000 to 2010 to have released debut albums. Mm-hmm. Their debut albums came out a year apart, and then they went up against each other, and one rose and one fell when they fought. It's almost like a Greek tragedy, like a Greek play.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'd like, just to finish off, this album is essential because it seems so crucial, yet so of the era, yet you listen to it and it's better than you remember. And the songs, like a song like In the Club, like I was saying before, is almost like one of the biggest songs of the past 20 years. So it's hard to, it's hard to think that this came from a person in an era that we lived through. Like, the song is just that, I can't remember a time where In the Club didn't exist.
Yeah. So a lot of what makes this album essential to me probably leans on that song. Like, because it's weird that the way you laid that out, it's almost like Kanye West turned the page stylistically for that sort of genre of music, and 50 Cent was left like, oh, what about all my stuff? What about like gunshot samples? And so he like kept doing his own thing or whatever, and Kanye West kind of took over that the like directing what was cool, you know?
Yeah.
So when I look, and you said like it feels like 10 years passed because it was a huge change, right? So the effect of that was kind of to make this album sound dated pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because 10 years of development just happened in the art form. So when you go back and listen to some of these beats, they're like, some of them are pretty dated sounding. But then again, into club keeps going strong, and that keeps in the loop. So I'm actually going to say it's not essential because the stylistic elements haven't carried that much. It sounds a little bit too dated to be essential. That's my take on it. But in the club though, if that was, you know, if that continues and like 10 years from now, it's still like everybody's still singing that song, my opinion would probably change, because I'm like, well, you got to see where this came from.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do want to say too, like, I know we're acting like there were the only two people who existed, but yeah, there was also like Jay-Z at the time who was making songs that were produced by Kanye and produced.
Very upset listening to this.
He probably doesn't even think about us. Think about anyone. But yeah, no, like, I don't want to take anything away from Jay-Z, but I'm just talking from like my personal experience. Like, Jay-Z was there and he was making different music, but he's just kind of been a constant because he was around way before this and way after this. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, he's kind of navigated through that. I mean, he doesn't make beats, but he knows how to pick the right producers and discover talent. So for me, the equating the two is purely their albums came out a year apart, and then they literally went head to head.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a good metaphor for kind of what happened, right? It's good. It kind of tells the story. Maybe that should be
and even like it went almost like, you know, you had the gangster rap with 50 Cent, and then you had Kanye West come out a year later and he's wearing a knapsack with a polo with the things popped up, and
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, when that became cool, suddenly, like, you know, 50 Cent's chains ain't so cool anymore. You know what I mean? It just kind of felt like things changed.
Because even like for me, I know I was saying at the beginning how I had like a G-Unit spinner necklace, but it's not like I was wearing it. It was more I bought it as like a joke. Not that they were a joke or anything was a joke. It was just sort of like, I like the music. I'm a fan of, you know, gangster rap or New York hip hop and stuff like that, but it's not like I can dress the part. I almost feel like a phony. Whereas when Kanye came out, it's like he's dressing like how we were dressing. He worked at the Gap. He was rapping about working at the Gap. So I was like, okay, well, yeah, this fits more with me.
Yeah, I think also too, like, the thing that Kanye made mainstream, I mean, I know Bad Boy was doing it, but like just his work with samples and making songs just like catchy, like it appealed to everyone. Like, you have like, I mean, Ray Charles samples, so that's like broadening the audience as opposed to like a song like Heat where it's like gunshots as the beat. Like, and it definitely dictates your audience.
Yeah, and it changed what was cool. Like, it definitely just made this stuff, the gunshots, sound dated. It just made it. It just made that whole thing.
Gunshots will never be dated in hip hop.
Okay, but
I'm just thinking of like Nas, like what's it called? They Shootin'. That's another good song with gunshots.
Yeah.
But I mean, the other thing is too, like, since I did like Eminem and like those 99 releases, I always kind of will respect this. Like, if you didn't like Eminem or you didn't get into like that stuff, like 2001 Eminem and that shady Aftermath sound, if those seeds weren't already planted, I could also see why you might bypass 50 Cent and just kind of go like to Kanye West, like musically, because like those 99 to like 05, that was like dominant shady Aftermath, like in every way.
For me, when it comes to like the hip hop of like the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was sort of getting into it, It's almost like equated to new metal in my mind, where it was this. There was some stuff that was good, but it wasn't like. I feel like the hip hop that came before it and after it were better, and there was certain like songs and stuff I liked, or certain artists I liked. Like 50 Cent came out, I was into G Unit stuff, and T.I. was releasing stuff that I liked, and Jay-Z was, but it seemed like no one's peak was during that time, other than Eminem, Dr. Dre, 50 Cent, where it was all sort of new. But yeah,
you also had like, sorry, go ahead.
I can see how, like, for Ryan, how it would sound dated, not coming up through that and living through that, or
only hearing it through pop culture.
Yes. Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, even the first run through for me, this sounded a bit dated, as opposed to as the week went on, it's almost like it was more part of. I was listening to it every day, so the song started standing out again, and I started falling in love with songs again. And
no, all I was going to say was, like, around that, in that same time, you also had like those two big Outkast albums, like where they were definitely deviating from standard hip hop with their own unique music.
Very true. And another that was far away from this style. It was like more goofy. It was more like playful, not so serious about everything. The gangster side of it was kind of put to rest, really.
Yeah.
So
they kind of have it's almost like Kanye West and Outkast was more in line with aesthetic, like they were more colorful and more into it wasn't gangster rap.
Yeah. Or you could throw like NERD in that mix a little bit.
The skateboard hip hop Lupe Fiasco.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's all I have. Did you guys have any final thoughts before we end it?
No.
Listen to 50 Cent. Listen to The Game. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, I think that's the next hip hop album. So why is that one so much better? Oh, actually, you know what? Before we get into The Game, or maybe more importantly, a question I had that I missed before: what exactly is defining a Dre beat? We didn't really cover that. We talk about Dre beats a lot, but what makes it? What's the sound of a Dre beat to you guys, anyway?
It has, like, for me, it sounds expensive, first of all. And then you have like the heavy piano, like the
yeah, okay,
that sort of sound.
Or he doesn't,
or the you get into his older stuff.
He also does really good kind of like guitar noodling. Like, you'll hear some tracks where it's just like he's just kind of strumming some strings, it sounds like, but it's just repeated. Like it's like a repeated loop. Yeah, you got like maybe a bar of that, and it just repeats that. Yeah, like he'll have like the piano or like a cellos or violin, but it's just like for the big hits, like like I don't know. Even when another artist does it, it's like, oh, this sounds like a Dre beat.
There's like only maybe like 4 elements going on, and they don't seem usually too heavy. They're not like a Kanye West beat where there's all this extra stuff. It seems like there's a simple set of loops that work together. It's
like there is definitely, when you listen to 2001 and then there's definitely direct lines of how the production sounds. But when you jump into old Dre stuff like NWA or The Chronic, you kind of get, it's different back then, obviously,
right?
And this stuff, but for me, it seems like when people refer to a Dre beat, it's more so this late '90s, early 2000s sound, or the high pitched from like the early gangster rap stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Was it like Nothing Like a G Thing or those Snoop Dogg beats?
Because now he works with like Anderson .Paak and stuff now, but it seems like it's sort of a mix of every. Like his production it doesn't seem as like of this era where it was sort of like an aesthetic.
Yeah, well, you would hope that it would be the same anymore.
Yeah, constantly evolving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or I mean, like the classic example of a Dre beat could be like Still Dre.
Yeah.
Or like Next Episode, or there's so many classic songs on that album.
Yeah, so good.
I don't know. We should do a Dre beat or a Dre album. Look up for Detox. But yeah, no, that's all I have. So, I mean, if you guys don't have anything else to add, I guess we could wrap it up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, guys.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Essential Albums podcast. That one was recorded in February. Surrender your ears, because next week we cover the second #1 album from the Chemical Brothers. Watch out for new episodes. You can find us on Anchor, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. And give us a follow on Instagram at the Essential Albums Podcast. Original music by Ryan Dugal and artwork by Vincent Tran.